Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. GC Strategies finds itself under more scrutiny this evening. The company behind ArriveCan, the app that cost Canadian taxpayers nearly $60 million, was the subject of a news investigation by Presse. An investigation that found GC Strategies has in fact received over 100 government contracts before, worth tens of millions of dollars that all started in 2015.
So let's recap. A company that had never before received contracts from the federal government started getting an avalanche of contracts just 3 weeks after this Prime Minister took office. The company, in fact, got $250 million for IT, even though it admits it doesn't do IT. It has 4 employees and has a headquarters in the basement of a cottage. Can the Prime Minister explain why this suspicious company started getting these contracts exactly 21 days after he took office?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Obviously an unacceptable situation, which is why the relevant authorities are fully investigating exactly what went on here, particularly highlighted by the Auditor General's recent report. This is an issue we need to continue to understand and make sure that the rules are being followed, make sure that our procurement practices across government are respectful of taxpayer money.
Well, joining us now is Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for Presse. Joël-Denis, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, I think for many Canadians, I think it's fair to say, many Canadians did not even hear of GC Strategies before, but obviously a company well known by Ottawa circles based on the investigation that you did. Just how well is this company known in Ottawa? How often have they been turned to by government?
Well, they're known by a little number of people within some departments because they've been relying on that company for contracts for IT services, so internet or linked to computers. And but they do act mainly as middlemen between the government and real IT companies. So, and by getting those contracts, they get a commission of about between 15 and 30%. That was exposed last November by the 2 people who went before a committee of Parliament when they were studying the ArriveCan issue, and they said that they get about 30% commission. But that does increase the cost of doing business for the government. So there's a famous question that the Auditor General always asks: did taxpayers get value for money? And so that question applies in that issue because that little company with 2 people based in a bungalow in a suburb of Ottawa got close to $250 million in contracts from the government for IT services.
And this is $250 million across what, since 2015?
Yes, exactly. That's according to what I saw, I discovered by looking at the contracts. And it goes from one department to the other. You've got Statistics Canada, you've got Global Affairs, Innovation Department, also Fisheries and Ocean, but mostly the Canadian Border Services Agency. They got a lot of contracts given to that company. Yeah,
and as you say, a commission on the roughly $60 million that was spent on the ArriveCan app itself.
They got a third of that budget, according to the Auditor General. They got 20 millions out of the 60 millions that we know that app cost to taxpayers so far.
Yeah, and because the Auditor General said it was the best estimation they could have based on what they saw. But it's interesting because you mentioned 2 people, and talk to us a bit more about GC Strategies, because last I saw it is that small. We're talking about 2 people that run a company that at the end of the day was able to accumulate contracts worth $250 million.
That's why it's raising so many questions. How a little company of that sort could get so many contracts with that total amount of value. And I was reading a feature on those 2 people that was published in a local Ottawa newspaper, and they were bragging about the fact that their revenues were exploding up to 676% since they had began business in Ottawa. And that, relationship with the government, getting so many contracts, explain why their businesses was doing so well in that time.
Yeah, and you have tried to speak to GC Strategies yourself. In fact, you went to that bungalow that you talked about offhand.
Yes.
What do you want to know from them? And because, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of questions, but that's where they remain, questions right now.
Yes, questions that I think all opposition parties and regular folks, Canadians, and even the government. Today, the Prime Minister was saying that I'm also asking myself questions about what did that company did for the government. And so what was their exact role? Why were they involved in those contracts? How did they get those contracts? And how do you disperse the money to the companies that does the work when you're only two people? You need some kind of human resources department to manage that, some financial operations that is, quite huge. And the Auditor General noticed that in the ArriveCan application development that there was little or no paper trail in most of the work that was supposedly done. So a lot of questions, and some part of the contracts that were given to GC Strategies have been referred to the RCMP. So there's a criminal investigation. We don't know what the exact nature of that investigation is, but we know that the RCMP is looking at that.
Yeah, and I think that's important to say, right? Like we still don't know a lot. We don't know where that investigation is, so we wait to see what follows out of that.
And we've tried to reach the two owners of that company on several occasions over the last 2 days, and with no success.
Now, we started this conversation by playing a bit of Pierre Poilievre in the House today for people at home. You spoke to them. La Presse spoke with Pierre Poilievre. What else is the Conservative leader proposing to do here to follow up on your report?
They're going to try to get two committees to look at those contracts. The Public Accounts Committee, which usually looks at spending of the government, but also government operations and budget estimates. So those two separate committees. And so I expect that committee to look at it in the coming days. But today also the Conservative went further in asking that the Auditor General look at all the contracts that were awarded to that company over the last 8 years.
Okay. Joël-Denis Bellavance, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Michael.